When we talk about dealing with people from different backgrounds and cultures, very often the topic of diversity comes into the conversation. Diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, a term specifically in North America that has gone through the socio-political ringer. It is charged up with different meanings. It is opposed against. It is fought for. Is it really necessary? Can we talk about inclusive behaviors without the political charge? We have a guest today that will help us unpack some of that.
Welcome to Two Chaps, Many Cultures.
In an increasingly globally connected world, it is vital to possess the essential skills of cultural intelligence.
Listen along as we present the topics, tips and strategies you can use to develop the power of cultural understanding in your personal and professional life. Here are your hosts, Höferle and Brett Parry.
Welcome back to Two Chaps, Many Cultures. That is the name of this show. I'm Brett, he's Christian, and we have names. And as we always learnt, when we put a name to something, should it always stick? Well, obviously, if you're born with a name and you're given a name, that's what people get to know you as. What about larger topics, larger things that we are interacting with on a day-to-day basis? Do we actually name them with some intentionality? And what happens if people identify that name with something that may be negative or something that causes problems in a societal sense? So we're going to talk about that today. Before we do, and we introduce our wonderful guest, as Christian says, we're going to ask you to hit the subscribe button, ring that bell on YouTube if you want to be notified of all of the new episodes that come out every week here. And also don't forget our podcast now, which is live across all kinds of platforms, Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, now on iHeartRadio, by the way. We're on the radio. Imagine that, which is good for us because we've got good faces for radio. Let's get into the topic for today. We're going to talk about what's in a name. What is in a description? What is a name of a concept or a practice, especially in terms of the professional sense? And we've got our wonderful guest here, Mr. Taj Suleyman. Welcome to the Two Chaps, Many Cultures studio. And again, just deep gratitude for you joining us today, sir.
Thank you for having me, and I appreciate it. It's nice to be added now. I don't know if you should call it Three Chaps just for today. But I appreciate, I've always appreciate your authentic conversations of how you guys have in previously. So I'm honored that I'm invited. So
Most certainly. Wassalamu alaikum, Taj. Thanks for being here. Tell us a little bit, what brings you to this conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion? Why do you think we brought you here to make us three chaps for this episode? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to ask why if you have a hidden agenda. So I'll have to now check with you. I'll have to ask you, like, why am I here? I'm being interviewed. You asked me why you're here. But what I've actually, through my very brief peeks on your interaction, I really appreciated it. Like I said, it's authentic, it's simple, it's also in a way where anyone can relate to this conversation. The wondering, the curiosity that I've always grown up. I've always been raised by just asking the question. So I appreciate those questions that are not attached to any agendas, if you will. So that's something I wanted to put out there too. Also, as we have seen, and you are already part of what we have in common, the three of us, the intercultural field, and also somewhat the DEI / the international experiences. We're seeing more and more nationally in the United States the conversations, even prior to the buzzword around DEI. As you may know, in our intercultural settings, the conversations has always been, is it either or? Is it a combination of social justice theoretical framework or intercultural theoretical framework? If we are addressing a challenge, a social challenge or social issues, which tool do we use, and which one is more leaning towards? And part will address the power dynamic, while you're putting labels on maybe individuals, situations, systems. It's now becoming more and more hard to use a term that it's going to have multiple doors, basically, to define it. If I wanted to define race, or if I wanted to define racism, or if I wanted to define disparities, these are all charged with lots of emotions, lots of notions that often can set you in an interesting, I would say, tone, even when you're trying to whether educate or facilitate or address. It's becoming, everything has basically several labels that often can either hinder or can sound like, oh, finally I heard that word, I need to run. Or some was like, well, I'm having my hands up, I don't know if I wanted to engage with this anymore, because it has the divisive, or oh, here we go again. Or so what are the ways? I guess we're trying to find ways, what is next, basically? Is this are we comfortable with utilizing terms? Are we comfortable with driving towards positive change in where we are, without being mindful of the audiences, or without being mindful of the regional, the cultural, around regions where we are in this country? So I don't know if you have yet talked about it, but I really would like, through your expertise, through your inquiries with me, interaction with me, I'd like to explore that with you, and hopefully whoever is going to watch us or is watching us, I'd like to also get their input. It's worth having this conversation.
What brings you to this field of DEI? Your job title currently is, you're the DEI officer for the city of Springfield, Missouri, correct?
Correct. Director, yes.
Director. So you're not a native of Springfield, Missouri, though, are you?
No, I'm not a native. I wasn't born. If that's what you mean, I was not born, and I was born and raised in Lebanon, the country, and I have to make it clear because there is about an hour away from here a small city called Lebanon. Lebanon, same spelling, and from both Sudanese father and a Saudi Arabian mother, who both had also their kind of share of the international experiences, and I am a former refugee as well, and I always like to put those identities and those, because that's what shapes a lot of, as you may know, as your experts and scholar practitioners, if you will, when we hear the global nomad or the TCK, when we hear those terms, we imagine a military brat or someone, what do you call the missionary brat? Is that the term? Or this is how we've seen it. We have yet seeing the immigrants as part of this TCK, or refugee, like myself. So I've always seen, always been comfortable, and as remember Barbara Shetty or other these scholars, intercultural scholars. I've learned how to find not just comfort, but also I strive being in a margin. That's personally. So not marginalized. And this is, again, you go to social justice theoretical framework, marginalized mean you're not supposed to be here. And in I kind of reclaim that narrative. It's like, no, I'm supposed to be watching a movie with you. I'm watching you in a movie, and I enjoy it. Sometimes I step in, and sometimes I, get to. So identity has played a big role in recognizing the level of investment sometimes we have towards a topic in the community. And as a DEI director, what can we do in my community, 170,000 population in the Midwest, the Ozark, the Bible Belt, Buckle, all of these elements. And in 2021, they decided to have that position. Now, what was the motive? There are lots of motives around that time, but we're seeing now more and more what type of fuel do we need to use to move forward, and what is the relevance in my office, or in my team. I have another staff, that we can continue that momentum rather than waiting for an event to happen so we can respond to it, or let's call the DEI guy basically to address or put out that fire. So we're seeing now, trying to find ways, and this is where I appreciate the combination of, there has to be a multidisciplinary framework that would help us address this situation, not a single disciplinary that would address oppression, if you will, or address disparities, or address whatever definitions laying around us.
You've brought up a good point there, Taj. We're going to steal this, I think, this idea of being comfortable in the margins but not marginalized. That's pretty powerful for me, because if you think about that, we're talking about today the perception of a term like DEI, and especially when it isn't a title and it's attached to someone with your rich experience and comfortability with being in the margins. Obviously, where the people that we see that are maybe pushing back on this are people that are most comfortable in, not in the margins, right? They're comfortable, and this is what's a threat to them. Mm. The people that do this work are threats to them because and you mentioned the power structures too, right? It's a threat to their power structure. It's a threat to their existence. It's an existential viewpoint from their perspective. So we can get that. And I guess in their work, we want to be cognizant of what that's doing to them mentally, psychologically, and things like that. But then to me, this tie, like you said, the tie is because we work with people that are coming here with comfort and security. Right. And they sometimes say, I kind of operate in the margins too, because I'm a leader. I'm comfortable doing that. I've led people from different backgrounds. And no matter what identity they are, they have to break into kind of being part of the group. And it's a tough thing. So I would argue not everybody, yes, there are people that come from different backgrounds. Your story is of survival and tenacity and all of that is inspiring. And other people go through in a different experience, like me. I always tell people my biggest problem in my growing up was which beach to go to. That was my upbringing. So that's different to other people's experience.
Yeah.
So what we're trying,
please forgive me for interrupting.
Absolutely.
I don't know if technology can catch that, but the empathetic link that I could have with you and have with Christian and the three of us. Often, if I compare my, war zone lived experiences in Lebanon versus which beach you want to go to, that is something that often power can play a dynamic, but also, do I disconnect from you because your issue was which beach to find, or you broke a fingernail? So I guess this is a question, not we're trying to figure out how to do it, but how do we address power dynamic while we're also recognizing the necessity of empathy and relating on any level? You've heard back in the day and during COVID where people was like, well, we're all in the same boat. It's like, yeah. And then people was like, well, some are in coach and some are, down in the boiler, whatever they call it, the engine and
the gunnels.
right. So I do recognize that some have yet to see the value of the power dynamic. Also, those who see the power dynamic can isolate themselves, in an opportunity that I wonder if it's worth exploring. If I wanted to talk about, and I will be more direct, because I come from an indirect culture. It's like, what's your point, Taj? Both of you are looking at me. It's like, yeah, get to the point. The concept of privilege, and specifically when we're talking about white privilege, I've always heard it. I've studied it. But is privilege, for instance, and this is hopefully not controversial, but is it considered to be a curse? Is it considered to be a leverage? Is it considered to be a blessing? Is it considered, what can we do? Like someone like me working in a predominantly white community, a white male community, but then fluctuate in socioeconomic, and then you're talking about DEI for someone who is from a town called here Blue Eye. I always like to use that example because I interact with some of the folks there. Basically, like, what are you trying to tell me about privilege? To them, privilege is probably the financial power. But to maybe someone like me is maybe systemic power. So those, how are we using, what type of translators and transmitters are we using to talk about how can we have in a community where we cherish those diversity? And I'm not talking about just sing kumbaya songs, but what are the ways that we can leverage off of what I have of power or of privilege or advantage towards a community overall, and that's something hopefully it's addressed among the three of us.
So here's a thought, and just listening to what you've been sharing up until now, I get the feeling that perhaps the way we've approached this conversation, specifically in the United States and North America and parts of Western Europe as well, it is very often an agenda or agenda-driven conversation that is trying to upset the status quo in order to be more inclusive or to bring about more equity for everyone in society. And in doing so, we sometimes put a further wedge into society rather than become more inclusive. I mean, I'm gonna be, and forgive me now for being super direct, because my cultural background behooves me to call the kettle black, or in this case, call the white man white.
Right.
Are we, by making claims of we need to change the system, we need to dismantle the system, we need to end the white supremacist patriarchy, whatever slogans might be attached to the work of DEI, and I would say falsely or erroneously so, because that's, in my opinion, not the work that DEI does, but very often it's been put into that basket of social justice warriors who are kind of revolutionary in their approach and very aggressive, and perhaps as a result not very inclusive in doing so. Mm-hmm. So if we really think that by dismantling a system, whatever it may be and however it may protect my white privilege, right, if I claim to undo that system in order to build something better, who will be allowed to rebuild it? Right? Who right. are we then including to create something better? And are we willing to endure that period of being without a functioning system? Are we right. willing to endure the chaos that we are going to create by taking stuff apart to its individual parts.
Right.
I know controversial questions, and I know that a lot of DI practitioners will not subscribe to that equivalency here. But we've seen that a lot, especially in North America, and especially as you described earlier, in a reactionary sense. You are in Missouri. Your office probably was maybe in part motivated to be put in place after the George Floyd incident and the St. Louis incidents of racial injustice and protests against racial injustice.
Right.
So how do we go about this in a constructive way? Or as you said, how do we go about it using whatever privilege some groups have to bring about more equity and inclusion? I know a big question, how do we create world peace? But maybe we can solve that question here.
Right. And it's already happening. I think this is kind of the human nature in as social beings. Even though, I when people, I lived in Portland, Oregon. Of course, I lived in Utah and also in Iowa. And my friends in Portland or the Northwest is like, what are you doing in there? Are you safe? And vice versa. Folks here is like, oh, you live there. I can only imagine how you live among folks there. So the otherness plays a big role. The also how we introduce the conversation. It's I think it's the key, because it's hard to troubleshoot when we are not setting the tone. The I want to use the term ground rules, or a way folks can see the relevance and the importance and the buy-in in the work that we're doing. So you're talking about dismantling the system. I think it's also becoming a fantasy to dismantle something or to break something or to use force into against the force. So I don't want to be always the idea, the practical person, but if you want to see what that would look like, I think it would cost more to rebuild than to recognize the system and work towards I want to use the word fixing it. In this case, whether policies or whether practices or whether education among the staff, or whether eventually diversifying the workforce, or whether having those seeds, because I think it involves more than quantitative and qualitative data, because you're dealing with people. So that's something that I've always been mindful in my training sessions, if you will, around I inject emotional intelligence, while before talking about diversity and the concept of diversity, also the concept of culture. What is culture? And one, I remember one gentleman from Public Works said, well, I feel ashamed, I don't have a culture. I'm from this town out in the woods, and I don't think I do have a culture. I said, I beg to differ, sir. So the concept then, if you see it nationally, international kind of a definition around culture, sombrero hats, whatever that is, you're only limiting the key in the not what do you call the unseen. I've always been fascinating, and it's so probably are you by the definition of culture. What is culture? What is the culture of an organization? What is the culture of the community? What are the multiple bubbles within that bubble? And when you actually have that realization, will you feel inconvenient if we have an inclusive culture? Will you feel that something is going to be taken away? Then you're not understanding the concept of culture. So it is good for you. And so yes, there is a promotion of inclusion, but each of the participants, Brett and Christian, they feel they're part of the solution rather than you have these identities and you would never know what's like to to feel safe if you're driving, or or for me to assume that I don't know what's like to be confused about which jacket to wear or which socks to wear. So this is something I think empathy plays a big role in recognizing while there is an issue, we see it on a daily basis. We continue to see it. It's never gonna go overnight. And I wanted to throw something out there, and please say, try to justify what I said here. But even within the civil rights work, which I was not born in the 60s and the 70s, even there are movements that are still functioning from what happened in the 60s, rather than recognizing also what could happen and where we are right now in a time that we are. What are the tools that can be necessary from there, from the civil rights era to our time right now, while complemented with the current solutions, because demographically we're changing. We have now, as you might have worked already, in maybe smaller towns, smaller cities, there is that. It's not in census even. There is the identity that people are hardly talking about it, which is I relate it to TCK, but the biracial identity. What you go and sit down with a biracial person and work with them and say, well, what are you? And it's not fun always to ask that question, but what are you? Are you white or are you black? And they'll tell you, if I go there, I don't find me fully, and if I go here, same thing. So I created my own reality, and this is growing and growing. We're seeing families are reaching out to community foundations because they don't know how to deal with their own grandkids on a social level because of their identity and who they are. So is the question, can we complement, as we are comfortable with the intercultural theoretical framework, complement both with each other to recognize that if you are going to address power dynamic, also address the interaction with these power dynamic and with these cross cultural identities in a way where people can invest in it in a healthy way rather than in a I want to use the word aggressive. Maybe I'm being too long here in the Midwest, but a way where it is constructive or naturally it's already taken place in the community, rather than we are setting the tone and the definition and the label, as Americans in general like to put everything with a label. So this is where we are. I think this is something that, I don't know if you agree with me, but this is something that we're noticing. The is one disciplinary is going to be the only solution, the only pill that will cure us? Mm-hmm. Or what are the courses, and when do we use what in implementing change that everybody by its meaning, everybody can feel that they're contributing through what they already have. So we've seen it in movies, we've seen it in, if you want to build a house, the whole community will come together, and some will have a nail, some will have a hammer. How does that work? And that's something that I'm interested in exploring here in my position.
I was thinking, can we not equate interculturality with intersectionality? Is that, you said about somebody saying to you, I don't feel like I have a culture.
Right.
So perhaps they, that's something to recognize. But then when you really dig into their identity, it doesn't matter what they look like, who they pray to, who they love, right? You can always pick up some sense of intersectionality where there is an identity at which some point in their life they have felt excluded, and so that gives them some empathy. That was kind of what I was thinking when you were saying that. And then so we started this out talking about what it is about a word. What's a name? So is it now, rather than push back against the pushback of against DEI, right? Rather than see it as a negative, maybe embrace it and say, actually, you're right. This is how I kind of disarm people when they say that DEI is woke and it's all. Why not say to them, you're right? Because what we've done, we've put a fence around something and made it quite exclusive.
Right.
And
right.
so now, can we both come up with a term that we're all comfortable with that recognizes the humanity and the identities and intersectionality and interculturality of everybody?
Yeah. Christian, you were gonna say something. I'm noticing.
Yeah, I'm observing this because I come to this conversation from way out left field, right? I grew up in a fairly monocultural, predominantly white society where, yes, I also enjoyed some level of privilege, however, not at the expense of a lot of other people, because the society in which I grew up was not as diverse as the society in which I live today. I find it interesting how we here in the US or in other Western, so-called Western societies, we seem to enjoy change processes in a belligerent way, in a dualistic winner takes all fight.
Right.
Instead of trying to figure out, just like you said earlier, I got the hammer, can you bring the nails? And maybe we can find a third party who brings the 2x4s and let's start building something.
Right.
That is a different start to the conversation than saying, I'm right, you're wrong. No, the opposite is true. And we seem to live in a world where it's a lot more entertaining. There's a lot more clicks and a lot more eyeballs going to the cage fight of I'm wrong and you're right and whatever. That's a different show. That's a different, it is a show instead of a constructive conversation that leads to a better outcome.
What was, Christian? I wanted to forgive me for interrupting. There's something that a few weeks ago when we briefly talked, you said something about I was somehow making an observation about how debate classes in the United States are. I remember one time I was asked to be a judge in one of those competitions. And someone came and like this is totally unhealthy, and he this kid managed to actually convince me that I should be drinking whatever the unhealthy potion was through debate. And of course there's a counter to that debate, but there was something, Christian, you did like, I did like, and I is it the Socratic approach and that's something that I feel it's okay towards what is it what is right or who is right. And often we struggle with both. Is it about me proving to you that I'm wrong, I'm right, or is it this situation can't afford go any further in our community or our organization or our team, that for the sake of team, what can we do to resolve, to leverage off of these diverse talents that we have, for instance, or to invite, economically, this is why it's good for business, this is why it's good, so I wonder if this is worth discussion as we're talking about what earlier Brett talked about, the intersectionality and interculturality. Often intersectionality it talks about the multiple identities within our identity, and the sophistication of who we are, while the interculturality helps with, okay, let's see those interactions, and also address some of the dynamic. Let's talk about some of the dynamic. Both are valuable. And that's something I think it took me, I would say, more than 10 to 12 years for me to recognize where I am, in seeing that there's a need for more than social justice, and there is a need for more the intercultural framework. We are at a time right now, even though in the advancement of both social justice theoretical framework, especially when they are, within on the ground grassroots activism, versus the intercultural, communication framework. I see it sometimes isolated or self-isolate, because you realize you use sophisticated terms, and it becomes becomes an elite often, in both, that it's hard to marry them together. And we've seen some scholars, as like for instance Catherine Sorrell or others, that they talk about, Dr. Catherine Sorrell and others, and Dr. Amr Ahmed, and others, they're seeing it. They've addressed the intercultural praxis model. They start seeing, but I still felt, even when we as interculturalists, we were laughing earlier about the concept, but the interculturalists, the foundational interculturalists, they while we're addressing inclusion through these lenses, I find myself being excluded for being part of a mindset within the intercultural theoretical framework or social justice theoretical framework. I could be wrong. I don't know. I might be, maybe my intercultural membership is going to be taken away, and the social justice is not going to. No. Hey, it's happened to me before.
You're born with it. Nobody can take it away from you.
But is it something? And we've seen it in conferences, in meetings, and we interacted that often. I have to create a lane, and I think maybe it's an American or maybe European thing. I have a lane, I have a box. I have to conceptualize it, capture it, but it's not a cookie cutter. There's more into when talking. If it's a theory, if I have a model that works well on paper, will I be able to, can I be open enough and humble enough to see the value of some of it in my work, instead of saying, well, copy and paste? Nope, it needs to, you need to finish session 1 and session 2 and session 3. If the whole session, if the one session can meet it all, then by relationship, by leveraging the value, the community value, the what do you value as a community, as a team member, as a department member, and let's leverage off of that for us to actually say, well, you may call it DEI, but I call it, I don't know, cheese and crackers. I don't know what it is.
Well, what will you call it? You told me earlier that, or you told us both earlier before we hit the record button, that your department will go through, well, have a new definition or a new name at least. I don't know if it will change the definition of your work, but the title on your business card will change. So what will it be from future on?
Yeah, so we're planning. A couple of weeks ago, we presented before the city council on the transition of the name, and now we're going through some legality and some policy work here, from the DEI, or Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, to actually Office of Belonging and Intercultural Development. This probably would be the only office that I've heard of, I've seen. We weren't looking to be on a Guinness book, or but also seeing how DEI is deepened within the concept of belonging, and the intercultural development component can address both interpersonal and across cultural when we know the concept of culture. So professional development, you want to use the intercultural theoretical framework around learning styles, communication styles, while recognizing the culture, the intersectional identities as well, right? But I'm now talking to two, if we're walking on the street and it's like, well, these are two white men and black men walking together, wonder which town in the United States they're from and originally, or where they were born, until they get closer and start hearing accents, like, whoa, okay, well, I'm confused now, so the identity is becoming more and more complex, and it is, for someone like at least me, and you may relate to, feel suffocated basically by, like, oh no, you're a Middle Eastern, Taj. I've had friends who's like, well, no, you're an Arab, or I go to my African friends, Sudanese, like, no, you're one of us, look at you. So it is good to have the sense of belonging, but it's, you decide that the condition of how I belong here and how I become. That's empowerment.
Very good. I thought that perhaps I would draw a metaphor, because I'm certainly not academic, and I don't use very complicated words. That's why we bring smart people like you on.
Sure. I'll make up something in Arabic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But seriously, I was actually, you brought up Socrates before. I think this is interesting. And again, I'm not a studier of the topic, but it's Socrates, to me, there's an example or a metaphor for inclusion and why it's important, or belonging, is that you're bringing three different concepts. So Socrates came up with the idea, but he didn't write it down. No. He just kind of came up with the ideas and walked around the streets, and and he upset a lot of people by doing it. And then Plato came along and said, well, hey, somebody's got to capture this, right? That was his skill, right? He wrote the Platonic verses. He brought ideas in that form. And then, of course, Aristotle then went a step further and turned it into an Encyclopedia Britannica of facts, right? So there's data, there's concepts, there's ideas, and everybody is really uniquely placed to interpret and present them. And that's just true of life, I think. To me, that was what I got out of this. It was actually a podcast I was listening to, the wonderful Hidden Brain podcast.
I was wondering where he pulled that out from. Right?
I know. I should have not said it, because I would have sounded a lot smarter than I am. But but it is really, it was profound for me, is that in such a really complicated, thoughtful kind of space and academic exploration of self and all of that kind of thing, that Socrates, you can actually draw some very basic distinct or connections to today's world, and how we might want to kind of just get people around us that think differently, record differently, communicate differently, because other than that, we're just an amoeba, we're just kind of one big blob, and it doesn't make for very interesting conversations.
Yeah, and yet on that topic, I mean, let's stick with that historic metaphor. Most of us probably know what happened to Mr. Socrates. His life ended prematurely because he was told to end it himself by drinking from the poisonous chalice. So the messenger got killed, so to say. So are we at this crossroads in the DEI world, that those who bring the message are about to be sidelined because we are finding it's too difficult to accept that our societal structure is flawed? Or do we recognize that no matter what period of history we lived in, those societies who were exclusive, who did not create a sense of belonging within their communities, did not succeed? It was the societies that made people from different corners come to a crossroads and feel like they belonged and built something bigger. Those were usually the societies in the course of human history who prevailed for a much, much longer time, right?
Now Christian, something I want to insert, if that's and again, forgive me for I get excited, hearing some of the points you shared. I say that diversity is a recipe for disaster as much as it is a recipe for success. When you are not recognizing diversity and the concept of diversity and leveraging, whether business organization, private organization or a team, if you want them all to say, well, I don't care about who you are and what you're bringing in, just do your darn job and leave, versus, you know what, I'm going to challenge your team. We have a situation, we have a scenario, we have an issue. I'd like you, I'm going to give you a day, 10 minutes, half an hour, a time to go and come back with a solution for it, or with how you want to break it down to me. And when we sit all, this is a great way. I'm sure, you have done some activities with organizations with, they see the value, I am able to be more circular, or maybe, this is how I fix a situation or a scenario. That is where the success happens. So there is a leverage off of what you're bringing in, not because of, and I do admit that I'm a handsome guy, but it's not always, I know it's a money maker thing, but this is what I say here. When I say it is a disaster, when you leave it untouched, when you leave diverse perspective, diverse identities untouched, just for the sake of tokenization and the quota, right? But if you are recognizing more in depth of the team that you have, with what you have, I can't dismantle the team because they're all white. I can't dismantle the team because they are all women. So what can I do with the intersectional identities that they have even within them, the cultural identity, the big bubble, to recognize that, hey, I have a raw material here I need to leverage off of. So I don't know if in what context, Christian, I don't know if that's I hope I didn't derail your thought. Please forgive me again, but this is something that I've always seen, that sure, the percentage, how many quote unquote minority have you hired, versus what are the values of hiring diverse representation, right?
You didn't derail anything. I think you drew it to the smart conclusion that, and forgive me if I'm not hearing you correctly, but what I hear you say is, let's get away from this simple thinking of this was wrong and we can do better by undoing which was wrong and completely start from scratch. You're saying let's find the beauty within the existing system, find the resources that are in it already and have been untouched or untapped as of yet, and find ways to improve it from within rather than tearing it down and hoping to rebuild it better, which chances are it might not be better than it was before. Am I hearing that correctly?
Right. And it is it's easy to, if you're talking practically on the ground, what that would look like. We pilot projects. I like that concept. I don't know if it I might change my mind in the future, but it's been going for the last 5 to 7 years in my career specifically. I like the idea of piloting. I like the idea of, if I see a team, an organization, a department, a team, division that they're working, I like to sit back, again, watching the movie, to say, you're working on this project. I wonder if this is the tools that you have intellectually, professionally. If you have it, go and do it, and let's watch it. And let's see the other team, they're working on something similar, and come back and say, okay, does this plant work well in your department? And if it does it work in the whole organization? And maybe this is our own identity. Maybe this is our own culture. So I've been lucky with the trust of the most, I would say, be frank, most of the department heads here within the city with trust, and even with the name change, even with the recognition of the DEI lens, if you will, within project, within grant, with their certificates, within not just the don't do it, and if you do that, or you have to do that, otherwise you'll be penalized by the federal government, right? The compliance component. There's no need to use the stick if you're interacting with folks. Say, well, you strive. You strive for success. You strive for, these are the challenges that you have. DEI lens can help, or OBIT now can help with recognizing, the what do you call it? The thought process. Recognize the, you can't just problem solution. You have to stop somewhere where you recognize. So, you've already seen some of the scholars and interact with some of the scholars that they talk about, the George Renwick, for instance, the late scholar George. I mean, if you sit down, he is definitely, he looks, he's white. But if you sit down and speak with him, and probably if you learn, you heard them speak Mandarin, he's like, whoa, okay, this is, and he's breaking down the organizational structure in such a creative way that, when you're seeing intercultural theoretical framework, or even social justice, they're being put in the work not for the check off. They're actually embodying the concepts towards, I can go home right now and I don't have to struggle or feel stuck or burn out at work. I process something internally, and I process something with someone that we differ in perspective or in identities, that at least I am at peace with it today, and tomorrow I'll address it instead of feeling disconnected. So we're now we're recruiting for intercultural facilitators within the city, who are representative of different different departments. They will go through emotional intelligence, diversity, inclusion, intercultural framework, and if it's okay for me to give a shout out to the EIDI, the Intercultural Intelligence and and Diversity Institute through Anita Rowe, and Donna, of course, and others. So we are trying to find a way to, this is not what we like to use here, because I'm in Springfield, the silver bullet, because we talk about our guns and hunting here, but it's not the only way, but there is a recognition that we are trying to find our own identity within the city, despite the other DI theoretical framework or the work that is already taking place in the community. We took a stand and said we'd like to add, we'd like to look beyond the just the limited way of some folks probably will see DEI. We'd like to expand on it.
Wonderful. Well, Taj,
yes,
this is a great conversation. This is really rich, and I hope those who are watching or listening appreciate when we get the chance to bring somebody like you onto this program. We just can't help learning from you. And you mentioned George Renwick. George Renwick was one of those people too. You just sat in that gentleman's aura, and you couldn't help learn. And you are counted amongst those that we look to do the same kind of thing, Taj. So may your work continue, inshallah, with great prosperity, and that you bring all these people and everybody that is around you that's been inspired by you and led by you is going to see the fulfillment of the ongoing practice. It's great. You know, we love doing this work. This is what drives us every day, right? Talking about being in the margins, that's where the fun happens. So we try and inspire people, right?
You get to have popcorn while watching. So
there we go.
Yeah. So it's a great honor to have you, sir. So thank you very much.
You heard the man. There is no silver bullet. We got to do the work. It is work that continues, right? We might be drawn to quick fixes or the promise of a permanent turnaround of any situation. I'm at an age now where I've come to realize any change you want is worth working on, and it means you gotta keep plugging away at it. So with that, I am happy that we were able to showcase a practitioner in the field today from the Midwest in a place where you may have not expected that to be at the center of someone's work. So whatever we call it in the future, whatever label we put on it, whatever name we use for the work continues. We serve humanity. We build community, and that works a lot better if we do it together.
Right, absolutely. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And this is a model that we've been using here. So again, by the way, both of you, from my interaction with you, you've given me enough, too much credit, but I've learned so much from whether offline or or even just watching you from far. So I do appreciate that opportunity, and I hope you'll engage more and more of us, just simply to ask the question, how well are we doing it, and are there ways to do it in a sustainable, healthy way where I could go and not feel burnt out in the field that I'm in, and you probably can understand. I could go and play golf like folks, and the chief of police will probably, I don't know if he likes golf, but I need to ask him. I could be in part of the work instead of feeling that I'm in constant fight, and it could take the toll on our health. So I look forward to finding ways that we could do it with less tension and more joy. Yeah.
Beautiful. So thank you. That's Two Chaps, Many Cultures. I actually believe this might be a two-part series. We probably need to bring you back, Taj, because it's a great topic. And anybody who wants to reach out to Taj, please. He's an open book and a great teacher, and I'm sure he would welcome having a chat. And we're here too. We want to have a chat too. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your feedback. We want to hear your perspective, what your thoughts are on what we talked about today. Put them in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, we've got a whole comment section there. We've got emails. We've got websites, the Cultural Mastery. Go to the Cultural Mastery. Check that out. Lots of resources there. And also our YouTube channel and our podcast. So it's another one in the can. Thank you very much, Taj. Again, deep honor for having you on and taking the time to do this. So very much appreciated. This is Two Chaps, Many Culture, where too much culture is barely enough, and too much belonging is never enough.
No, not enough.
See you later, everybody. Bye now.